Well, I'm here at Dan Brereton studio talking about Nocturnals. Well, tell us about the Kickstarter that you're doing right now with 31 years of Nocturnals. What are people getting with that Kickstarter?
The idea is 31 years rather than 30, partially because this is the year that we're putting out the Sinister Path miniseries. It's kind of what my editor called the halloweenaversary of Nocturnals, being it, Halloween's on 31st of October, and there's such a huge Halloween kind of ingredient in the books, which it's had a nice ring to it, made sense to me. So I thought, well, I've got enough material to do a new book with it, but also there are some other things I'd like to do in the book that I have wanted to do and other people have asked me to do, which is you should do more of the process galleries and show, work in progress and the stages of the work. It's something I've done only once before in one of my other art books, and I wanted to do it again. So a lot of these new pieces and covers that I've been doing have these stages where you can see, what's going on. And most of that comes out of my Patreon stuff, because I run a lot of process galleries on Patreon for the patrons, and they get to see these stages of just most everything I do in the studio. So that was kind of fun to be able to kind of plan that as something in the book. So you'll get to see like a lot of the process and where it starts and where it ends up, and with some of the insights that can come out of that. There's a lot of artwork that has not been seen before that is new. There's stuff that's coming out of the archives, concept things that have just kind of been in a flat file or things I'm unearthing as I go looking that are pretty interesting. A lot of that stuff has to do with the process of how you create these things, where they start from, where they go, different characters maybe that like were going to be in the story that didn't make it into the story. There's at least one of those that you're going to see. So that kind of stuff is cool. And as I'm doing the Kickstarter, I'm giving away art through like a sort of a giveaway. I'm offering original art, and I'm doing art to go into the book that didn't exist before there was even an art project to put it into. That's another thing I like doing with Kickstarter is it always breeds new work and keeps me really busy.
Dan, tell us what came first with Nocturnals. How was it created? Character, story, etc. How did that evolve? How did you create Nocturnals?
I was on a plane going to Scotland to a comic book show in Scotland. I think it was 1992. I wanted to do something that was like over the top pulp fiction stuff I'd been exposed to. And it was the first time I'd ever seen any pulp magazines. And there was this character called Captain Satan, and a very short-lived pulp character. And I thought, wow, what a cool name. And it started making me realize that like there was some sort of these over-the-top sort of elements in pulp that sort of carried on into comics. And I wanted to do something like that. I had this idea, so I thought, well, what would be a really pulpy name for a character? And that's when I came up with Doc Horror. And that seemed sufficiently crazy and out there. And also the idea that you could take genres like crime and supernatural or horror, and you could kind of mix them together. And I wanted to do that too, because I really wanted to do something that felt like a crime book, but I didn't want to draw guys in suits with guns necessarily. I wanted to draw monsters. And so the Nocturnals kind of came out of that desire and kind of went from there. I had also characters that had been in my sketchbooks for a while that I was doing here and there, and I had ideas for them and stories, and I basically set about trying to kind of move them all together into one narrative. How would they all work together? What was the main story? And so the story that I came up with early on in 92 did not end up being exactly what it was that I would put into print. It became more of a family unit. The characters became less sort of mercenary and more personal. In fact, I found that there was at least one character who I thought was going to be a pretty major villain, the raccoon, who I started to feel kind of some affinity for. And I thought, well, I don't want him just to be a one-dimensional bad guy. I want him to have some depth, and maybe there's a redemption for this character. And so those kinds of things started happening. And I noticed that if I start liking a character too much, I get to the point where I start wanting to save them. and not make them a two-dimensional. And I don't think any even a bad guy should be a two-dimensional bad guy, but sometimes they're just beyond redemption. And we do have this, I don't know what it is, but we like to take these bad guys sometimes and we like to reform them, just like we did with Darth Vader, because originally Darth Vader was not a character that I ever saw as being worthy of reform. When I was a kid, I wanted him to be vanquished and defeated. But once you start to get closer to them, maybe you start to understand them or have sympathy for them. And I found that happened with Nocturnals on more than one occasion. And I started to become more, less about wanting to do like a pulp pastiche and more about wanting to know who these characters were, what made them tick. And it just came out of just starting to care for them more, having more of a feeling that I wanted a stake in what was going on with their lives. I was interested in who they were, and I wanted to tell their stories.
And what keeps you invested creatively in Nocturnals, and what's changed about them over time?
You definitely get to a point with a lot of this stuff where you feel like you've told the story, and you feel like maybe it's time to move on to something else. And I have done lots of other things, and I have done many things that haven't had a life yet in the pages of a comic that I wanted to do. But I always come back to the Nocturnals because I want to know more about them. You know, I care about them. I feel like there's more story there. There's always questions that I have about them that I'm kind of hesitant to answer. I think part of what makes these kinds of characters and a lot of these stories interesting is the mystery. And I don't want to kill the mystery for the readers or for myself. So there's always certain questions that I want to see answered that I deliberately don't just go in and answer them. In fact, sometimes I've come up with ideas and then over time I think, oh, I've got a better idea than that for this person's origin or what makes them tick. So there's always something I can be doing that to add to it or to expand on it. So they become very personal to me over time, and I want to just know more about them.
And is there a big shift in thinking creatively from writer to illustrator, or combining it into one thing?
Yes and no, because when I'm coming up with ideas for story, I'm not necessarily thinking as one or the other. But when I sat down and I'm doing the layouts and I'm thinking visually when I'm doing the layouts, but I'm also thinking about pacing and where is the story going. And when I finally get the artwork done, that's when I sit down and I really start to think hard exclusively about the dialogue. And there's a shift there. Like when I'm working on something like this, I can talk, I can have TV going in the background or radio or whatever. I can concentrate on something else while I'm painting. But when I'm writing, I can't concentrate on anything but what's being said and what's happening in the story. I have to be in that room. I have to be with those characters. I have to be them and inhabit them. And so I find that when that's happening, there's a whole other set of circumstances that have to be in place for me to do that. And it's very different. It requires all my attention and all my focus to sit down, put myself in a room or a situation with the characters. What are they going to say? What do they mean to each other? And immerse yourself in that situation where you're basically, what color did I put on here? You're putting yourself in there and you're inhabiting them. And sometimes it's not easy, and sometimes it takes a little while to get into the groove. And then you get into the groove and you're there. And that's when it kind of goes into sort of not necessarily an autopilot, but a kind of, it's not autopilot, it's not auto writing because you're still thinking, but the characters have their voices start to pop in and they start telling you things that, so it stops being me putting words in the mouths of the characters and the characters starting to vibe with each other and talk. And that's when you kind of channel through all these ideas and stuff. And that's where you get the story, and that's where you get the dialogue, and that's what moves things along. And you're no longer in your space anymore, and that requires 110% focus to do. And I really love when that happens. Sometimes it takes a while for it to click in. Maybe that's what they call writer's block sometimes. But I find that when I'm in that groove, I can stay in that as long as I want to.
And why do you think the characters resonate for readers? And do you have a favorite?
Maybe, hopefully, for the same reason that they resonate with me is, I always want to know what's going on with them. I want to know more about their stories. I also want to show you more about who they are and what their stories are. And I just feel like they're kind of like my children, and I enjoy seeing them develop and knowing what's going on with them. I want to see them grow. I want to see their arcs sort of take shape as things go along. I don't always know where that arc is going to take them. There's always a set of choices that you make as a storyteller, and you want to pick the one that makes the most sense and helps. For me, I kind of look at plot and story as like a puzzle. I want everything to kind of come together and fit together in the end into something that makes sense, start to finish. I don't know. Maybe some people that feel simplistic. I don't know. It doesn't feel simplistic to me. It feels like you want a satisfying sort of conclusion, but you also want to feel like if when you're at the end, everything at the beginning starts to click into place. It just clicks into place and it just feels better. It's like when you're working on a piece of artwork and all the colors and all the values and the shapes start to work together and click. It's the same thing with the story. I want it to all click in the end. And I like that feeling, and I like to just explore as much of that as I can with the characters.
And which character do you like the most?
Eve is easy to kind of click into because there's a lot of her in me as far as like when I was a kid and the things I was interested in. But there's also this sort of idea of like she was probably braver than I was as a kid. And there's admirable things about her, not just things that I necessarily relate to, but also admirable things that I kind of wish I had more of when I was a kid, and you can kind of go back and you can kind of use this character as a way to sort of, how do I explain it? It's not live vicariously. It's just, she's fearless. And if I was afraid of the dark, she's not afraid of the dark, but we both liked monsters and we both like making friends of monsters. And that's kind of what I did with my artwork is I made friends of the monsters with my art. And that kept the fear away, because there was fear when I was a kid. And I think for her, clinging to Halloween is her way of keeping away the fear and uncertainty of a very strange and dangerous life that she and her father are involved in, and the rest of the Nocturnals.
And where do you see the characters going? At what point do you see a story ending, or does it? And do these characters age in real time? Where does this go?
I don't think it can age in real time because I just don't have enough hours in the day to like devote to making these stories as much as I would like. So I have to really slow everything down, the timeline, and that's okay. I to be honest, I really don't have any interest in seeing Eve grow up into an adult. I feel something would be lost there. I like the idea that she's always a kid, and as long as she's a kid, I can explore stories about a kid doing kid things and thinking kid ways. But then there's other characters in the story who aren't kids, and I do want to see them evolve, and I want them to have their own. I want everyone to have an arc. I mean, Eve, even though I don't want Eve to grow up into adulthood or don't necessarily at this point in time feel like that's part of my what drives me with her, I do have an arc in mind for her. So I do want to see her sort of come into her abilities and her powers and come to an understanding a little bit more about who she is and where she comes from. I want her to meet her mother at some point in time. I think that's important to resolve the mother issues that she and her father have, because she's this kind of like figure that doesn't really appear in the stories, isn't talked about a lot, but she must be big and huge in their lives in a way that I want to be able to somehow deal with and address. And so things like that, things in the story like that are another reason why I keep going back, because I want to address those things and I want to tell that part of the story. And as far as moving forward, I feel like there's always something that's going to interest me about them that I want to know about, and you don't always have that luxury in comics or any kind of storytelling genre. If you have if you're like a Robert Parker writing Spencer novels and they're very popular and you've got all this time to write them and you're a fast writer, you could put out all these stories and you can have an endless kind of parade of learning about them or just kind of being engaged in different facets of their life. So it's a much more slower process, but I don't mind that so much because it gives me plenty of time to think about my next move. So right now I'm the Nocturnals Sinister Path graphic novel that I completed in 2017. Was it 2017 or 2016? That's being re-released by Dark Horse as a 4-issue miniseries this fall, and I was able to go back in and put some more work into the story. There's 8 new pages of story in there, but I can expand on it, so that's pretty exciting thing to be able to do.
Sinister Path, the comic, did you ever envision it as a comic book, or was it just always envisioned as a graphic novel? What was that, and how does it get adapted toward comic book format?
No, I definitely saw it as being a graphic novel. It was executed as a graphic novel, but it wasn't until talking with Dark Horse about re-releasing it, because it didn't get a big release when it first came out. Far more people have seen the omnibus hardcovers that Dark Horse has put out in the last couple of years than ever saw Sinister Path. So it seemed like a good idea to get it out there for people that had completely missed it and new readers. And it was just going to be a trade paperback graphic novel. And then we had the idea to do it as a 4-issue miniseries first, which again was not the plan. And that's one of the reasons why there's all this new material in there, because it wasn't written, it wasn't designed or laid out to be a miniseries. So I went about doing things to give it a much more miniseries feel. It has like a comic book. It's got splash pages. It has a couple of scenes that have been kind of expanded a little bit that I felt would be good to have in there. I mean, I could have done that a lot more than I did, but then again, it might have been too much. So I feel like what we have with these 8 new pages is great. It gives another dimension to things. People who are familiar with the story will get more, so as a kind of an extended edition. And it was really neat to kind of remake it as a 4-issue miniseries, you know, in a more conventional comic book format. I really enjoyed doing that. And I'm really kind of excited about the idea of it coming out as a, you know, month-to-month 4-issue serialized story with new covers. And that was really fun to do, new covers and everything. We have some variants coming from people like Sean Gordon Murphy and Mike Oming and a couple other people that I'm going to let you be surprised by later. And that's really exciting too. So it's like giving it a new life and reaching a whole new audience of people is pretty cool.
Hey, Dan, well, thanks for having me in your studio. I had a good time looking at your creative process and checking out what you have coming down the pipeline.
Thanks for coming to my studio and checking it out. What do you think?
I like it. Sexy, sassy, energetic. Love it.